Welcome to my channel. Today, a napkin journal tutorial. I'm going to combine a napkin with a stencil and create a vintage background. Here's a sneak peek of the finished page, and at the end I'm going to recap using my art journal process cards. Check the link if you wish to purchase these. So I'm starting with this napkin from Ninny's Napkins and these beautiful vintage colored wine bottles. And I'm just cutting apart one section of this, and I'm going to attempt a new way of cutting around it. So I'm only going to remove one layer of the two extra plies that are on the napkin. Now I want to cut out these wine bottles to be able to rearrange on my page. And instead of using my water brush, I'm going to use repositionable glue. And I'm putting this on a piece of scrap paper. You can put it on a magazine page, anything. All you want it to do is to give support to the napkin so it's easier and not so floppy when you go to cut it out. Now make sure you go right to the edges. I didn't, and I ran into a little bit of trouble because of that. But this is the first time I've attempted this, so then what you can do is just simply use your scissors and cut the elements out. Now this is more helpful of a technique for cutting out the elements when you have smaller elements like flower blossoms or something that's more intricate. You want to stabilize the napkin so you can cut it out more easily. But I thought I'd try with something that was relatively easy to cut out. So I'm just cutting out, and it is, if you've ever tried to cut out even 3 plies of napkin and then peel off the backing, it's more difficult. So I'm cutting out this in the middle because at this point in time, I'm thinking I'm only going to use these 3. And then you just peel the top layer, the printed layer of the napkin comes off. And that second ply stays adhered to the scrap paper. And you have a perfectly cut out element that you can use on your art journal page. And there's the extra ply. Now this did not work with regular glue stick when I tried it. So there's something about the repositionable glue. If you don't believe me, you can try it on your own. So I'm throwing out this scrap paper that had stabilized it, and now I have my elements that I can play with and figure out the composition on my page. So I know I'm going to put these wine bottles in this corner. And I'm using this Ciao Bella stamp set, Breathe Darling. And I've got this floral motif stamp. You get both of these stamps that I use are on here. This one's just floral, and it reminded me of vintage. And I'm going with the same color scheme that's in the napkins that's dictated by wine country. So I'm stamping. I'm not trying to get perfect stamps. Then I have this one, and I can't remember the name of it at this minute. It'll be in the description box, but it looks like a grapevine stamp. It's a woodware stamp. I've gotten all these stamps from Ninny's Napkins, and a link and coupon code is in the description box below. So again, I'm stamping on here. My goal, I want it to feel vintage. I want it to feel like a vineyard. So that's the feeling I want to create in the background. And again, I'm leaving out that bottom right-hand corner because that's where I'm going to put the wine bottles. Now I want to colorize the page, and I'm going very neutral, and I'm using unbleached titanium. It took me a long time before I discovered unbleached titanium, but now my tube is almost filled. So I'm thinning the paint a little bit because I don't want it as opaque. or all the areas. I want that stamping that I did with archival ink to still show through, but not be forward. If I wanted it to be more forward, I would put it after the paint. Then I'm taking this stencil and I'm using a baby wipe and I'm removing some of that paint through the stencil. This gives a very faded, fine pattern to the background. I love the removing paint through a stencil technique. Now I've played with the sentiment pack, my Wine About It sentiment pack, which has just been put up for sale at Ninny's Napkins. And I'm using one of the sentiments of that. I will also link a video where I make wine tags using those sentiments, especially the funny ones, to make wine tags. You want to check that out. So I'm using this Vineyard stencil, sign stencil from the Crafter's Workshop, and I'm mixing TCW clear modeling paste with acrylic paint. And I'm mixing orange and deep violet, and that's giving kind of a Merlot-ish color. You want more purple, add more purple. You want more orange, add more orange. It kind of makes a rosy gray. And then I'm using a key card, and I'm going to put that through the stencil. But before I do that, to hedge my bets and make sure I get a better looking stencil with the modeling paste, I tape down the stencil. I have better luck when I use a key card to apply my modeling pastes. But you can use a palette knife if that's what works for you. So I'm taking a little bit more of that clear modeling paste, and then I'm going to mix it with green to do the leaves. And I'm adding a bit of the copper penny modeling paste as well on the leaves. And there's the copper. I'm adding a little bit of that on the grapes as well. I have some excess modeling paste that I had made. So I'm just putting the stencil on a piece of white paper and I'm putting the excess through the stencil, and I'll set that aside and dry it, and I can cut it out and use this as a focal image on another wine themed page. Don't need to waste anything. Then I will take that stencil, wipe it off, and wash it whenever I've used modeling paste. So I've rearranged the composition of the page. I decided I'm going to use all 5 wine bottles. And I have another sentiment, does wine count as a serving of fruit, which also goes with this. Now I've grabbed the script stamp from that same Ciao Bella stamp set, and I'm stamping with, I think it's burgundy archival ink. Merlot, maybe it's called. And I'm just adding to that vintage background. And I love the size of this script. Can't have enough script stamps. Testing out where it is. Now I grab the same stencil, linked tiles, and I'm using a blending brush with the archival ink, and I'm putting it through. This gives a softer stencil imprint than you would if you were putting paint through it. And that's why I've chosen to use this. And I'm using the same stencil that I removed the paint through the stencil earlier. So you get, when you look at it, you have 2 different ways with the same pattern. And I'm rubbing along the edges, shading the edges with the burgundy archival ink and the blending brush. I'll put a link in my Amazon store to these blending brushes that I use. Loving that vintage background so much. Putting the wine bottles on here. And quite honestly, I could have put those wine bottles at the bottom and not have put a sentiment on here. And I know if you've watched any of my videos, 99% of the time I have sentiments on them. It's just the way I roll. But this one, I think I could do as a canvas or on a wood panel. And I don't know that I would put the sentiment on it. I think it would be a lovely kitchen canvas. As I said, the sentiment comes from my Wine About It sentiment pack. And I did increase the size using my printer settings. And I have a video showing how you can do that with my digital sentiments. I'm gluing the wine bottles down using fluid matte medium, and then I will do the same with the sentiment. Once I finally make a decision on the final composition. If I was doing this on a canvas, I might do 11 by 14, and that would allow me to, you would see a lot more of the vintage background. The white of the sentiment looked a little too white, didn't quite fit the vintage page, so I'm just using the blending brush and the archival ink and just going over it to make it fit. Now I'm shading or edging the page using my shading technique. That's adding a little bit of black. It just adds to the overall vintage feel. And the black ties in with the black that's in the bottles and the black that's in the lettering of the sentiment. Click on the iCards if you want to see me create the wine tag magnets that I sold at craft fairs. If you do craft fair makes, you really want to check that out. It's been a very popular craft fair item. So just click on the eye in the top right hand corner and that will bring you to that video. Now I'm taking my General's charcoal pencil, and this is the medium one, and I'm sketching around the bottles, just adding some lines, following the lines that are already there. And I'm using the charcoal as opposed to the Posca pan or shading because it just seems to fit the vintage feel a little better. It's less precise, more rustic looking. This really helped the wine bottles, the napkin focal image, stand out. And then I'm just going to outline the sentiment as well. When I got this stencil and this napkin within the same week, I just knew they had to go together. I'm splattering this with gold. And once it's dry, I'm going to use the heat tool to heat up the tape and remove that without removing paper. So let's move into the recap. I just love everything about this page. So I started off by cutting out the focal image from a napkin. That gave me the theme, that gave me the colors. I did some stamping with black archival ink onto the background, following the vintage vibe. Then I applied a base coat of color. In this case, it was unbleached titanium. And then I removed paint through a vintage stencil. And then using that same stencil, I used the blending brush with the archival ink. I put modeling paste through a stencil. In this case, I took TCW clear modeling paste and mixed the colors that I wanted using acrylic paint. I selected a sentiment from my Wine About It sentiment pack and blew it up. I shaded and edged around the page, and I doodled with my General's charcoal pencil around the wine bottles to make them pop out a little bit more. After a splatter of gold, the page was done. Would you like this on a canvas hanging in your wall? Until next time, go get creative.